Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up and coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And last weekend, I went to see Disclosure Day, the latest production from the certified Hollywood movie legend, producer, and director Steven Spielberg. Working from a screenplay by the equally laureled David Koepp, Disclosure Day is, by today's standards at least, a reasonably scaled science fiction blockbuster that stars Emily Blunt as a Kansas City TV meteorologist named Margaret Fairchild, and Josh O'Connor as Dr. Daniel Kellner, a cybersecurity expert turned whistleblower attempting to expose the secrets guarded by his former employers, Wardex, a private corporate contractor for the United States government with powers of influence that seem to outstrip even military and intelligence agencies. Koepp's screenplay drops us off in the action zone pretty much immediately, introducing us to Kellner as he is captured by a team of Wardex's top field agents, led by Colin Firth as Noah Scanlon. They at first seem to successfully coerce Kellner into returning an as yet unknown MacGuffin in exchange for a hostage, his girlfriend Jane, played by Eve Hewson. But Kellner is rather handily able to catch them in a bluff, revealing once he has Jane safe and sound that he's still in possession of some classified device that is apparently so dangerous that even the menacing Scanlon retreats from violent means to actually trying to reason with Kellner as he takes Jane and flees into the night. It's with similar haste that we find out exactly what it is that Wardex is up to. While hiding out in a convent where, it's revealed, Jane was a novitiate, a non-ordained nun, having apparently left due to a crisis of faith, it's there that Kellner also pulls up a secure laptop and gives Jane just a taste of what Wardex is sitting on, hard drives full of archival and security footage revealing beyond a shadow of a doubt not only the existence of intelligent extraterrestrial life, but a decades-long cover-up so obsequious that Kellner claims even the executive branch of the US government is no longer briefed on Wardex's operations and findings. Though it's notable that the emotional point that Koepp and Spielberg choose to leave us with is not simply the abject depiction of alien carcasses apparently retrieved from a fallen or who knows shot down craft, not simply the research of and extraction from their advanced technology that has of course served as a clandestine accelerator of human technological progress for some 80 years, but rather a stark wide-angle view from a security feed of a surgical room where Jane watches, immediately and intuitively heartbroken, as a Wardex team, led by none other than Scanlon himself, performs experimental surgery on a live, unanesthetized alien that screams in agony before Kellner is compelled to slam the laptop shut. Meanwhile, in Kansas City, Margaret Fairchild, Blunt's meteorologist character, she's a regular golden bird scratching at the claws of her gilded cage. Though she plays right into the vivacious local weather girl stereotype, Margaret has ambitions of sitting in the hot seat, of being a full-fledged anchor, and she can't accomplish that locally. She's all but prepared to pull up stakes and move out of her luxurious loft apartment, much to the chagrin of her longtime boyfriend Jackson, played by Wyatt Russell. While arguing the pros and cons of moving, a red cardinal flies through the window and parks itself right there on the dining table, and Margaret seems to be certifiably transfixed by its presence, standing up slowly, staring into its blank gaze as though hypnotized, the breeze and highlights from the window blowing through her hair, a naive choral melody playing on the soundtrack. After Jackson chases the bird out of the window, Margaret seemingly returns to normal, but in her busied rush to reach the station in time for her segment, it becomes rapidly apparent that she has attained some kind of clairvoyant powers. Merely by looking in the eyes of the people she's talking to, she is able to know the most vulnerable, intimate details of their lives and seems to feel almost reflexively compelled to console and advise them, all the while becoming increasingly stressed stressed out and erratic before she finally goes on air, seizes up, and begins uttering these guttural, clicking noises from the back of her throat, almost like some mixture of speaking in tongues and Morse code, before she collapses right there in the studio and has to be hospitalized. Wardex is, of course, on this case as well, and it's while in the hospital that Margaret's clairvoyance alerts her to the danger of the shady men claiming to be FBI agents standing outside her room. In a frenzy, she insists that she and Jackson make a break for it, to where she doesn't know, but she just knows the direction, like a magnetic pull drawing the parallel narratives between her and Kellner into convergence, with Coleman Domingo as Hugo Wakefield, another Wardex defector serving as an interlocutor between the two from the apparent safety, not of some counterintelligence black site, but what, for all intents and purposes, looks almost like the backstage of a TV studio sitcom, handlers running around all over the place with large set pieces and props and clipboards. Obviously, a lot of really weird stuff is going on, certainly enough to placate our interests and serve as a solid foundation for a cat and mouse sci-fi thriller in lieu of any mystery, even any attempt at mystery about the alien stuff. And weird is definitely the correct point to leap off from in any discussion about Disclosure Day, because while both David Koepp and Steven Spielberg are coming together on this project off of a veritable renewed hot streak for both of them, Koepp having penned 3 pretty danged great thriller scripts for Steven Soderbergh in the last couple years, and Spielberg himself riding high on the veritable renaissance in terms of perception and accolades, not just as a commercial film director, but as an artist with productions like West Side Story and, of course, the brutally personal and soul-bearing The Fabelmans. Disclosure Day sees these two filmmakers poised to capitalize upon their well-honed talents in an environment where, whether it's the blockbuster success of Ryan Coogler's Southern Gothic pseudo-musical horror epic Sinners, or new word-of-mouth horror debuts like Obsession and Backrooms, or even financial bombs from earlier this year that continue to find new audiences through VOD, whether we're talking about The Bone Temple or The Bride, I have a feeling that Boots Riley's I Love Boosters and Alicia Harris's Is God Is are primed for a similar fate of slowly developing an online true cult fandom. There's something in the ether right now, even among mainstream film audiences, where, while they certainly aren't abandoning the run-of-the-mill fantasy tentpoles, they are nonetheless voting at the box office and in their post-theatrical reactions online for fantasy films that are, for better or worse, demonstrably not designed by committee, that are unique authorial works that even more so demonstrate a hunger for not merely the original from a limited historical sense, but for the weird, for the offbeat and bizarre, for a kind of fantasy cinema where, and this is certainly the case with Disclosure Day, you aren't even necessarily certain from moment to moment how you are, for lack of a better way of putting it, supposed to be reacting to it, almost as if the contents of the film are presented in such a way as to flout convention, to complicate our typical assumptions about how we are supposed to become invested in even a rather textbook, action-driven narrative spectacle movie. A perfect example of this is the very scene in which the seemingly hypnotized Margaret begins talking in that kind of alien throat speaking. As far as my personal experience, much of the audience, including myself, was kind of caught in a rather awkward silence, except for one woman a few rows back from me who was simply cracking up, something that had already been portrayed in the trailers for this movie as so portentous and eerie was coming off as certifiably ridiculous. But if you really stay with it and watch the way that Spielberg and editor Sarah Brosher cut back and forth between Margaret and her stunned studio audience, it's hard to not get the feeling that that brave lady behind me was absolutely responding the right way, that Spielberg is not attempting to take something ridiculous and portray it as ominous, that he's trying to steep us in a feeling of the awkward and absurd, that weirdness more than conventional fantasy excitement as the goal. It's appropriate that Disclosure Day is also something of a walk down memory lane for Spielberg. There's no getting around the abundant narrative and and thematic echoes of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, even Margaret's relationship with the increasingly exacerbated Jackson could be seen as a gender swapping of the Richard Dreyfuss and Terry Garr roles in that older film. The focus on Wardex's cruel treatment of the aliens itself could very well be a continuum with E.T. the Extraterrestrial. But Spielberg has always been a filmmaker whose synonymity with mainstream blockbuster success exceeds his penchant for not just the sentimental and crowd-pleasing, but the bizarre and absurd. Close Encounters itself, especially in that arc of Richard Dreyfuss's character, this man whose encounter with alien craft seems to cause an immediate nervous breakdown, or as the story goes on, a seemingly spiritual epiphany, following the calling of these mysterious visitors from the heavens, even though it means completely estranging himself from and abandoning his own wife and children. There are many funny moments in the build-up to that separation, but it's always tinged with this complicated sense of horror, even revulsion. We don't want to see this happening, the unraveling and disrepair of a quaint American nuclear family, but Spielberg takes us to that place because while he may make able time for sentimental moments, he doesn't want our experience of the film to be sentimental. He wants us to sit in that complicated, queer mixture of the appealing and the displeasing. Disclosure Day sees Spielberg making some of the most offbeat decisions he's made in a fantasy film in years, and I don't want to spoil too much of what I mean by that, to the extent that those touches of the bizarre are kind of the only reason to see Disclosure Day. For every endearingly offbeat moment in Disclosure Day, every charmingly awkward and absurd set piece, most especially ones following Margaret's journey, her own kind of spiritual awakening akin to that in Close Encounters, another signature of Spielberg's, that blurring of the line between mere fascination with the textures of science fiction, with alien bodies and technology, and the portrayal of his typically ensemble cast interactions with these strangers from the stars, even at a calling distance, as having a kind of religiosity to them, kept script in this case all but explicitly calling to the spiritual significance of what it must feel like not simply to know that these inexplicable alleged phenomena and anomalies of UFOs and alien encounters in real-world mass culture could be genuine, but how that for many people kind of takes the place of fundamentalist religions in an alienated, scientifically rational world, the aliens as potential angels or demons in some grand cosmic plan. For every bit of that, there's an absolutely befuddling lack of tact to Koepp's prose that can't really be said to be an example of a similar charming weirdness in Spielberg's story ideas and direction. Everyone from Kellner and Jane to Scanlon and Wakefield to Margaret and just about everybody has to participate in one form or another with a leaden, verbose debate over what is framed as the essential thematic conflict between these two camps, a philosophical binary, if you will, the thesis that the fact of extraterrestrial intelligence far exceeding our own must be covered up should it threaten to unseat all established order, especially as it relates to faith in God, rather explicitly, and the antithesis of that, the crisis of ideas, the singularity of human evolution in terms of its civilization, is already here, and people have a right to know the truth. These scenes are so impassioned and so didactic that you can't help but, I guess, begrudgingly admire Koepp by writing so many of these in-universe, highly specialized and informed and worldly and intelligent characters in the way that they probably do speak a lot in real life, which is with a navel-gazing pomp that instantly bores a lay-person viewer. In this context, I think Colin Firth easily comes off as the best in the ensemble. He manages to reach escape velocity simply by rising to the occasion of this, for its budget, remarkably scaled-down blockbuster sci-fi flick, this very B-movie feeling blockbuster, by playing into that preening, scene-chewing oratory role that in the years of fantasy cinema that informed so much of Spielberg's nostalgia in his own works. The part that he's playing here would have gone to a Christopher Lee or a Peter Cushing. He really does crawl up to that god-tier echelon on dependable, theatrically intense British character actors in a B sci-fi horror. He's really something to watch here. But villains are always the juiciest parts in B movies, whereas in the debate, I mean debate, not emotionally charged character moment, Kep's writing is so thudding and obvious. The debate between Kellner and Jane, the former representing the people have the inalienable right to know camp, and Jane, the relapsing Catholic, actually arguing with him like, no, what right do you have to suddenly introduce this shock into people's lives, this complete upending of their own various and already sometimes fraught, tempestuous ideas of God, of the spiritual firmament, of the nature of life and the world? To which I would just like to point out the obvious, which is that Kellner hasn't just shown Jane a video of alien bodies in a state of abjection, already deceased, already mutilated either by crash landing or by autopsy or both. He's shown her a video of a clearly emotive, intelligent being crying in pain as it is mutilated and subjected to suffering by people, by individuals within this invisible order that is responsible for keeping the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence and close encounter from coming to life. This is easily the most interesting emotional beat in Kep and Spielberg's collaboration here, to foreground for the audience the pain that is being inflicted on the ETs for cynical purposes, that their existence isn't merely being covered up, but exploited and extracted from, that they are oppressed upon their contact with humanity. Whereas Kep and Spielberg seem to have decided mutually to opt for a dramatic irony in which nobody ever brings that up. In all of these thudding, shallowly grand oratorical debates, nobody ever once mentions the suffering of the aliens, the persecution of the aliens, not once. Disclosure Day thus ends up being a 2.5-hour journey where pretty much every character is so wrapped up in the religiosity of alien contact, of alien influence as this invisible force that guides them together and serves as a kind of new spiritual firmament to not replace, but go alongside our present faith-based institutions, like the presence of aliens magnifying the majesty of God's creation rather than taking away from it. And what is the point of religiosity if it doesn't direct you rather centrally, earnestly, to alleviate suffering or show a path to redress it? Aliens have always been variously positive, negative, or ambivalent representations of the other, but in broader popular culture, it's clear that the appeal of conspiracy theories surrounding not only the existence of intelligent extraterrestrial life, but the idea that knowledge of their existence and contact with humanity is being kept from us, is that it is partly a faith-based construction. The very things that the ensemble characters of the film are saying threaten to upend established order. All of that stuff is so broadly taken for such passionate granted in large swaths of the United States, and with the last 12 years or so of white Christian nationalist insurgency in this country, nobody is so hopped up on alien conspiracy theories like white Protestant Christians. The very tenor that Spielberg is striking for, once again, that synthesis of rationalistic scientific speculation, and sometimes playing in the sandbox of conspiratorial conjecture, the synthesis of that with religiosity, with a spiritualist framing of knowledge of and contact with alien life outside ourselves as a kind of epiphany. That very intensity is inherently in opposition with the banality of what is the actually most important part of what all these characters know, but nobody ever mentions, which is that you got a bunch of butchers in a room ganging up on some poor moon man. That's actually a touchingly original conceit that so few First Contact movies in the tradition that Disclosure Day follows in even bother to explore, even in their sympathetic framings of the alien as other, as stand-in not for God, not for a new religion, but people with thoughts and needs and feelings and dreams and homes and families. It might be that Spielberg and Koepp are confident in playing some understated trick of dramatic irony, but I think it's simply a reflection of the fact that the immense pomp that they both grant to this philosophical debate over ethics of disturbing people's various established ideas of how the world works or whether there's a god or whatever. Religions may have an orthodox text, a philosophical foundation, but people believe all sorts of contradictory things, and some of those things are not nearly as contradictory as you think. For Jane, there's awaiting a big reconciliation moment where another Catholic is going to dive in just in the nick of time to literally explain to her that the existence of extraterrestrial life isn't necessarily in conflict with the Catholic interpretation of the Bible. She literally basically does an abbreviated version of the Scopes monkey trial defense for Jane, and this is kind of just nuts because my girl was a novitiate nun. She was a practicing nun. She would have known that the Roman Catholic Church does not teach a textual literalist interpretation of the Old Testament. She would have already known that the Roman Catholic Church doesn't teach creationism. They accept the theory of evolution. It's the same thing with alien life. It's hands off for them. They've been saying, that's not my wheelhouse for the better part of half a century now. And there's a perfect example too. Evolution, as far as the actual literalist, fundamentalist, right-wing Christian crazies out there, for a lot of them, aliens are perfectly explicable, but they're trying to get creationism taught in public schools as a competing science. Do you understand how stupid it is even to suggest that what pertains to scientific knowledge makes a fucking difference in terms of the established order of the world as most people experience it? What Koepp and Spielberg are doing here is just Hegelian regression. This is perversion. History is not the product of epochal syntheses of knowledge, you fucking moron. It is a material struggle, a conflict of interest. The part where the aliens are being exploited for the stuff that they make, that is the only important part. Rally, Martians, rally. The point of downplaying this as a foreground concern of the characters, if it is downplayed and not merely taken for granted, if it's a creative choice, I really just don't see what it does but render Disclosure Day a boring, talky, fatuous, faith-based film with the same exact anodyne, navel-gazing, and even when they do gesture at real-world injustice, not terribly consistent or serious moral values of the Christian independent cinema I keep up with way more than most people, and certainly enough to confidently say that Disclosure Day smacks of the same inauthenticity, the same obsequiousness, the same dishonesty and glib distanciation from which it emotionally exploits and then ignores suffering in favor of this elegiac relationship with a new invented religion. Yeah, I think that's about as accurate a way I can of describing Disclosure Day. It's a secular faith-based movie. And look, if you want wild, weird, faith-based science fiction, I got kind of bad news for all the Spielberg and Koepp fans. Those cynical indie Christian filmmakers are already kind of running laps around the secular elder statesman. I'll still recommend The Shift. I'm a big booster for Assassin 33 AD. I think I'm just going to have to settle with giving Spielberg and Koepp a 2.5 out of 5 on this one. Anyway, I'm getting out of here. Thank you so much for sticking through this whole video, and please don't be a stranger to shouting out in the comments. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Otherwise, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. I'm going to catch you guys next time.